As Women's History Month and Black History Month before it comes to a close, perhaps you're reflecting on your organization's month-specific initiatives to celebrate minority employees. But it's incredibly important to think about how your organization is celebrating and lifting up the voices of its employees of color, of its women employees, of its LGBTQ plus employees, the other 11 months of the year. Computer World writer Charlotte Trubin is here with me to discuss the idea of diversity, inclusion, and importantly, the idea of belonging within the workplace. Stick around. Charlotte, thank you so much for calling in and joining me all the way from the UK. I really appreciate it. It's great that you're here.
Thank you for having me, Juliet.
So, right off the bat, I talked a little bit in my intro there about this idea of belonging. And I think we all kind of know what the word belonging means. But I'm wondering if you can define it for me within the context of a workplace.
Yeah, of course. So I think belonging is unique to everyone, and everyone will feel like they belong in different
Mm-hmm.
ways. But one of the best definitions I've come across for it is feeling like you can turn up to work every day and be your authentic self.
That's a great point. So, also in my intro, I hinted at this idea of the importance of celebrating and importantly supporting your employees the other 11 months of the year outside of whatever month aligns with their identity. It's great to celebrate them within that specific month, but it's kind of all talk if you're not working hard to do what's best by them the other 11 months of the year. So I'm wondering if you can point to some specific examples of good advocacy in the tech space.
When it comes to D&I, one phrase that always springs to mind for me personally, and in the UK, it's very closely associated with the suffragettes and the fight for the women's right to vote, is the phrase deeds, not words, which I think is really important when you're kind of looking at setting up initiatives or D&I initiatives, because it's all very good saying you're going to do something or this is how we can improve the workplace for our minority employees. But actually, if there's no kind of tangible outcome or you don't actually put in the work or the effort to make it happen, to make the workplace more welcoming for them, then you might as well not have started in the first place.
Yeah, I like that. Deeds,
Um,
not words.
so one specific example I can think of is at McAfee. So their chief people officer, Chattel Lynch, has been working really hard over kind of the last 4 or 5 years to really kind of push for better equality across the company, with a real focus on gender equality. I believe that's kind of where she started. And I actually spoke to her back in 2018, and already she had loads of initiatives in place. She had unconscious bias training for all staff. She had gender balanced interview panels to the extent where they wouldn't sign off on a new hire if a female hadn't interviewed that person, or if a male and a female hadn't interviewed that person. And as a result of that, in 2019, McAfee actually achieved global gender pay parity across their whole organization.
I think that's a great point and a fairly easy initiative to start, and a good place perhaps to begin when companies are looking to make their workplace more inclusive, because it's pretty easy to just look across your organization and controlling for things like years of experience or how long someone has been at the company, and making sure that everyone is getting paid equally, regardless of gender. It's really no secret that here in the US, and I'm sure it's similar in the UK, that women are paid cents on the dollar compared to men, and it's even worse for women of color and for men of color. So it's an easy initiative to implement that can be done, I'm not going to say it's just an overnight initiative, but it's something that's pretty easy to start today. But I also like the point that you make about interviewing, and obviously where the where the job process begins is in applying and interviewing and recruitment. So I'm wondering if you can discuss how employees can make the recruitment processes more equitable. I know here in the US, it's obviously very easy for people to recruit from the top universities, but the top universities are very often like disproportionately white, disproportionately people that come from wealthy backgrounds, people that can afford to pay for quite expensive degrees here in the United States. You know, you're talking $60,000 or $70,000 a year. It's certainly not cheap to go to university. So I'm wondering what sort of measures companies can take to make sure that they're recruiting equitably for their entry level positions, for example.
Yeah, like I said, there's some very basic things you can do internally, like make sure your interview panels are gender neutral, implement unconscious bias training, and also something that's gained a lot of traction in recent years is making sure your job adverts are gender neutral and that your language is inclusive, and that actually you're not kind of turning people away or putting people off from applying before they've even kind of stepped through the door for an interview. But you make a really good point about where you recruit from, because although university in the UK is not quite as expensive as it is in the US, fees have tripled in kind of the last 10 years, and it has put a lot of people off kind of pursuing more traditional educational routes. So something that's very popular in the UK at the moment are coding boot camps. So especially ones that are kind of specifically targeted at minority groups. So there's one called Code First Girls, which offers free coding courses to women and non-binary people aged between 18 and 23. And there's another really good company that I've spoken to in the past called Code Your Future, which specifically works with refugees, immigrants, and people from low socioeconomic backgrounds in order to help them kind of get a foot in the door of the technology industry, because they otherwise might be shut out because they can't afford to kind of pursue a degree, an expensive degree. And I know in the US you have kind of some similar initiatives. So our colleague Galen Grunham recently wrote a really good article about how to hire and retain Black employees in the US, and he mentioned loads of really great organizations that work specifically with companies such as Code 2040, Digital Undivided, and Coding Black Females.
I'm going to link those articles down below. They're really great if you're looking for specific resources and specific organizations that can help you acquire more diverse talent. And importantly, these articles will also include some important measures about retaining the talent, because once you've got the talent, that's important, but retaining them is just as important. And that really ties into cultivating that sense of belonging. So retaining talent, it's obviously any company wants to do it. And I know some companies, I mean, especially tech companies, have specific measures in place to intentionally try and retain talent, you know, like making stock options, etc. But like I mentioned, that idea of belonging is also important. On the topic of retaining talent, I know we mentioned that there's hundreds of thousands, something like that, I believe, of IT job openings, and there's just simply not enough talent to fill them. And I know that you wrote a great article about reskilling and mentioning that, you know, it's easy if you have an IT role to fill. Yeah, you can poach someone from a different company, but that doesn't actually create a new person who's qualified to do this job. So I'm wondering if you can discuss the idea of reskilling, which I think is especially important when it comes to D&I measures and cultivating this feeling of belonging.
Yeah, that sense of belonging goes hand in hand with retention, because studies have actually shown that employees from minority backgrounds are more likely to take a job which pays less money if the company feels more kind of welcoming and to them, rather than go for a job which may pay more, but actually the work environment might feel more hostile. So yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
Cultivating that sense of belonging is integral to making sure your employees want to continue working for you. In terms of the skills gap, Microsoft recently predicted that the UK would require, I think it was 1.9 million extra software developers by 2025.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And like you say, you can't just kind of conjure them out of nowhere. You can't just, you could poach 10 developers from another company, but then that company's got to go out and find 10 developers. And by doing that, you're not solving the skills gap. You're just kind of kicking the problem into the long grass.
You can't poach 1.9 million people.
Exactly. So what a lot of companies have started to do, especially or started to think about as a result of the pandemic, especially companies that perhaps were traditional retail companies, but obviously during lockdown in the UK, retail has been shut for a lot of the year. So a lot of these companies, all their business has moved online. So now they might be thinking about, okay, well, how do we continue to make our e-commerce side of the business successful? We need to hire all these new tech employees. So rather than kind of firing large groups of people or large teams that are already at the organization, instead of kind of leaving people to find new jobs and getting rid of all that kind of knowledge and skill that these people have about the company they've worked for sometimes decades, a lot of organizations are now actually looking to reskill those employees and say, yeah, you might have worked in our shop fronts, but have you considered a career in cloud computing? This is what it means. This is what you could earn. Would you like to train? And we'll provide you with the training and the skills. And therefore, yeah, they're building talent rather than poaching talent.
That's a really interesting concept and certainly important, but I also would imagine that it can be quite intimidating to shift careers like that. So I really commend people who are willing to make this career shift. And similarly, I commend the companies that are willing to invest in their people. It's really important, obviously, to make sure that you're investing in your people. You're going to have a happier workforce. You're going to have people that want to stay at your company, and turnover is not cheap. But that does kind of also relate to this idea of, coming back to work. What is the workplace going to look like once the pandemic subsides and people are able to return to the office? And I know that there's been a really exciting, in some cases, push about remote work and how exciting it is for companies to be able to hire from, by the nature of remote work, a much more diverse talent pool. I mean, you can recruit in the entire country or the entire world if you want to. So you have a much better talent pool that is not only more diverse in background, diverse in education, and but also, diverse in experience. So I'm wondering about how all of this kind of relates to the return to work and to hybrid work.
So there are kind of pre-pandemic, I should say, there were already some specific programs that exist to help women, because the majority of the time it is women that do take career breaks, they do take time off, they do take time out of the workplace to have children, to raise families, and also just traditionally the burden of care, even if it's not for children, for perhaps parents or other relatives, is kind of placed on women. So there are a kind of a lot of schemes and a lot of opportunities to help bring women back into the workplace after they've had a career break. But in terms of moving forward after the pandemic and this idea of the hybrid workforce, it's exactly kind of what you've touched upon. You can now open up your hiring pool, like you say, if you are committed to either having kind of remote or hybrid work and making that kind of business model work. You can hire people that perhaps don't live in big cities or don't live in the big city where your kind of HQ is based, or like you say, live in a different country. And again, people that might not have traditionally been able to make it into the office 5 times a week, people with disabilities, again, people with kind of childcare or other kind of caring responsibilities.
I wonder too, just as we close out here, the challenge that hybrid work is going to pose to some of these remote employees that perhaps were hired remotely, onboarded remotely, when some of their counterparts, perhaps near a physical office location, are going back to work. I would imagine that it would be easy to sometimes overlook the employees that you're not physically seeing every day for promotions, for raises, to take on new projects, because, like I said, you're just not laying eyes on them all the time. And I think that this really importantly ties into diversity and inclusion because, like I mentioned, you're hiring from a much wider talent pool and you're able to make your hiring process much more equitable because you can hire literally anyone.
Absolutely. As much as kind of hybrid and remote work does open all these kind of doors and opportunities for lots of people, you also have to be very mindful, like you say, of kind of how it progresses and how you actually implement that kind of style of working to make sure it is a level playing field, it is kind of an equitable workplace, and that the person that is in the office kind of on the same days as the manager, or that is kind of in the office more, isn't kind of favored or kind of looked upon more favorably than employees that were told, yes, absolutely, you can work remotely. That's your job. You are a remote employee. Just because someone isn't physically present in the office doesn't mean they're not working as hard or they're not doing their job as well. And I think companies are going to have to be really mindful of that, because I do think it perhaps will become a new form of unconscious bias that we haven't seen before necessarily, because although companies do exist that have been doing hybrid and remote working long before the pandemic, the amount of companies that will be doing it moving forward is going to be unprecedented. Studies have actually kind of been done around this. I think there was one, I think it was about a decade ago now in China, where a company had employees physically in the office and employees working remotely. And they found that, unfortunately, the remote employees, their careers progressed at a lot slower rate than the employees that were physically in the office. So although we haven't kind of seen that bear out as a problem, I think it's definitely something that kind of managers and companies need to be very mindful of moving forward.
I think that's a great point and a really compelling point, because even though I guess you can say that, I guess it would make sense that someone who's not being physically seen every day is going to be overlooked, that certainly does not mean that it is okay or that it is right. So it is really important that managers are actively thinking about not only their employees that are in front of their faces every day, but also the ones that they have working from home or whatever co-working space is near them. So thank you, Charlotte, so much for calling in and joining me. I think this was a really valuable discussion and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Julia. It's a topic I love to write about, love to talk about. So it was a real pleasure having this discussion with you.
And to that end, we will have some of your articles linked below, specifically about reskilling and hybrid work. And like I mentioned, we will also be linking below Galen's articles that we mentioned about attracting and retaining specifically Black tech pros. Really important stuff to learn. So please do feel free to check them out. And thank you all so much for watching this episode of Today in Tech. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon in the corner so you're notified every single time we post a new video. If you have any questions or comments specifically around what your company is doing about diversity and inclusion and, importantly, belonging, please do leave them in the comments below. I'm really curious to see what companies are doing out there. Even if your company isn't a tech company, I think it's obviously equally as important. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time.